This story began sometime around my junior year of high school. I was 15 years old, and in that phase of my life where I didn't listen to anyone, yet, at the same time, was completely impressionable. At the beginning of the year, I was sitting in my 6th period chem class, probably zoned out, looking at my phone under the clunky gray lab table, when I heard 2 people laughing to my right. The way the classroom was set up was a long rectangle, so essentially, the teacher wouldn't really be able to hear what was going on in the back. The people laughing were a guy and a girl, Eric and Kelly. They were somewhat popular, not by the top of the food chain by any means, but everyone knew them. My younger sister knew Eric. They had a tennis match a month or 2 earlier. Eric was really funny. This is a crucial element to the story. He was definitely the class clown. He was tall, good looking, and extremely charismatic. I wasn't personally attracted to him, but I could see why everybody else was. I think at this point in time, I made one of the most regrettable decisions in my life. I decided to finally be friends with Eric. Eric was in my 2nd, 5th, and 6th period. The next morning, I poked him on the back in Spanish class. "Hey," I said, "I heard my sister kicked her ass in tennis." He turned around with a goofy smile, his friends all looking at me. "Who's your sister?" His voice had a specific cadence to it. "Karen," I replied. I don't remember the rest of this encounter, but I'm pretty sure he denied losing the tennis match. I think the conversation ended shortly thereafter, and my day continued until I saw him in math class. Algebra 2 was one of those classes where the teacher would lecture for a while, give us homework, and then let us have the rest of the period to work on it, so we wouldn't have to do it when we get home. I was looking at my paper, probably confused, when I hear a familiar voice. "Hey girl," and I looked down and saw Eric, crouched next to my desk on the floor. "What's up?" He started asking me about tennis, and once I told him that I played, a huge smile spread across his face. I think this is when he latched on to me. He asked for my phone number, and I gave it to him. That day, in our next period, he introduced me to Kelly. She was older and really intimidating. I never met anyone like her, and I was beginning to get excited at the prospect of getting these new, interesting friends. That night, he kept texting me nonstop. He would ask me questions, and then would reply with ha 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 to everything I said. I thought it was weird, but that was just his humor, I guess. After this day, he didn't leave my side. We spent most of the school day together, and then we would be in constant contact after school. This was 2011, so we were mostly on Facebook or doing group phone calls with Kelly and 2 other friends of mine I had brought into the group, Sasha and Natalie. There were lots of red flags. Eric wanted me to hold hands with him at school and told everybody that he had taken my virginity. For some reason, this wasn't something I got too mad about. I just thought it was weird. He would say, "Your virginity belongs to me." Again, I assumed it was just a joke. I always assumed Eric wasn't attracted to girls because he said he wasn't, although he would have sex with them and he would tell everybody and make fun of them. We would walk down a hallway after 5th period, and he would stop for a group of freshman girls waiting for him to give them all pecks on the lips. One time, we were walking to the bus, and there was a girl about 10 feet in front of us. She was cheating on her boyfriend, which I whispered to him, pointing her out. Yes, it was childish, but keep in mind in high school, I was only 15 at the time. He then proceeds to run towards her and stops her, only to point at me and tell her what I said. She came over and yelled at me, and he watched, laughing. A few months into the friendship, I began sneaking out with Eric, bringing him alcohol from my dad's liquor cabinet. Eric was a heavy drinker, especially considering her age. This came to a head when he asked Kelly and I to come over one night. His dad was in prison and his mom was in rehab, so he lived with his grandparents. We pulled up outside his house and his car wasn't there. We waited for a while, and finally he sped into the neighborhood and stumbled out of his driver's side, wasted. We followed him inside. His grandparents weren't home. I don't know what I said, but next thing I know, he grabs a knife off the kitchen counter and charges at me. I took off running, and I made it into Kelly's car, slamming the door shut and locking it. He stares at me through the window, before bursting out into laughter. My heart was racing and my blood ran cold. Kelly got into the car and we left. I don't know why I stuck around. It was like an abusive relationship. He told me that he was the only guy that would ever find me attractive, but somehow it would get turned into just a joke and I would let it go. I believe the breaking point was when I heard about the baby squirrel. He had found an alive baby squirrel after school and he brought it home. His grandparents said they didn't want it in the house, so we walked outside and tossed it into a pond before walking back in. I wasn't there for that, but it disgusted me. In algebra a few days later, he knocked my pen off my desk and called me a bitch. "Eric, I don't want to be friends with you anymore," I told him firmly. "Can you just not talk to me?" His head snapped back and he moved to the desk in front of me. "You know you won't be able to ignore me," he laughed. "I know where to find you." "I'm going to college next year," I reminded him. "You'll never be able to get away from me," he replied. "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. I know this sounds like a cheesy horror movie, but that was our exchange, word for word. The next week was endless phone calls and him trying to get me to talk to him at school. At first it was jovial, when he thought I was going to change my mind. And then he came up to me in math class and opened his book bag. Inside were several large kitchen knives. "In case there's a zombie attack," he said with another big smile. I should have told the teacher at that point. I really should have, but it wasn't until a few days later when he pushed me too far. "I'm going to rape you, then murder you, and I'll make Natalie film it," he said to me. I went to the dean's office and told them everything. I had grown up being told not to snitch, but I couldn't focus in class anymore. I had been a good kid, and I had never been in trouble, so they believed what I told them. Here's the kicker. They called him into the office, and he admitted to everything, nodding, smiling, confirming all of the stories I had told him. Dean Thomas sent me down the next day and told me that I needed to call the police. They said that there was clearly something wrong with him and that he didn't get it. They put a school version of a restraining order on him. He wasn't to talk to me, and during tests, he had to be taken to a separate classroom. He would do everything that he could to get around those rules. He would talk about me right in front of my face, but that wasn't technically talking to me. He said out loud to the class, "Some girl put a restraining order on me because she thinks I'm dangerous." The teacher laughed and said, "Doesn't she know you're joking? That's just you being Eric." The backlash that I faced was enormous. All of his groupies shunned me and laughed at me. Even my own friends said I was overreacting, except for Natalie. She was always intuitive. She said he made her feel uncomfortable and started following her around from class to class. When his birthday came, he approached me with Callie, and Callie said, "He wants you to wish him a happy birthday." Eventually, a mutual friend called me and told me Eric threatened to kill himself if I wouldn't talk to him again. I went back to the dean's office, and this time, every dean, vice principal, and even the principal got involved. My school was big. There was 550 kids in my class. The school year ended, and without the protection of the authorities there, I was fielding more phone calls, and when I blocked his phone number, he would call me on Callie's phone. He would drive around my neighborhood to see if my car was in the driveway. He even came to my tennis matches, the ones we initially bonded over. I could see his silhouette in the fence, watching me. By senior year, things had calmed down. His attention was elsewhere, and I picked my classes with the dean to ensure that we weren't in any together. He was still watching. I would be walking down the hallway with someone he didn't know, and then all of a sudden, he would be walking with us, next to my unassuming friend. "Hi, I'm Eric. Nice to meet you." He told my friends that he decided to wait for me, because we were soulmates, and I'd come around eventually. I graduated high school and moved out of town. I told my new college friends that if something ever happened to me, he was the one who did it. And that's all. There really is no conclusion. Really, except that he always knows when I come into town. I don't know how, because I've been blocked on everything. I suspect he just still checks my house. He has been arrested since, on drug charges and a few DUIs. I'm looking at his mugshots as I write this, to remember those dead eyes. Sometimes I think maybe I overreacted. maybe it all really was just a joke. I've always had a soft spot for the elderly, and I guess that's a normal thing considering most people would agree that the elderly are cute and sweet and whatnot. However, you don't see elderly men inside high schools anymore, especially to coach basketball. Right now I'm 18 years old and freshly graduated, but this specific incident starts August of 2019, just before I hit the start of my junior year. My small school hosts an open gym, basically just a practice for most sports in the early morning all throughout the summer. I used to attend since I participate in various sports including basketball. Our school never had any luck with our basketball program and often ran into roadblocks for every season, such as getting new coaches just about every year, which didn't help the fact that we went almost 3 years without winning a single game. Each year was the same: start open gym mid-summer, meet the new coach, and wait until the season starts. Until one day, the new coach had everybody turning heads and asking questions. I won't share the man's name for obvious reasons, but I'll call him Stan for lack of confusion. We were faced with a seemingly innocent and sweet 79-year-old man who decided to rise from retirement to coach women's basketball, just like the good old days, right? Now, right before the season started, I was scheduled to have my tonsils removed, which would put me in recovery right up until the day after our first game. Note, this is a point in time I had only had about 2 conversations with Stan, and the day before my procedure, he bought me a cupcake as a sweet treat for a sweet girl, in his words, as a sort of good luck during the removal. 10 days after my surgery, I was sent back to an emergency procedure because the cauterizing in my throat had opened. Once I had returned back to school, Stan had met me with a letter saying that they missed me, and he came to visit me in the hospital only to find that I had already been sent home. Still, I hadn't thought anything suspicious and believed that he was just a sweet old man who kept tugging at my heartstrings. Fast forward through the season, he began to get closer and closer with the team, and he even gave us a speech at our Christmas party stating that we made him feel young again and that he loves us. We finished out the season with time for club volleyball, which was not associated with our school, and tournaments took place only on weekends. A few friends and I started noticing that Stan would show up to my volleyball games on the weekends, wishing us good luck and giving us hugs when we left. We thought this was sweet and again thought nothing of it though. COVID now hits and we're forced to close down school and have absolutely no in-person contact with coaches or teachers, considering it was the beginning of the peak and they were still hoping to open back up if things died down. This was when Stan asked for my phone number. He claimed he wanted to keep in touch and send me baseball boot camp workouts to stay in shape and ready for the next year's season. Very quickly, this turned into him sending multiple texts reading "I love you," heart, and heart eye emojis. He would send those texts to me every single day, and then, very soon after, he would begin to ask me to come over and personally help me with the boot camp workouts. I agreed that if my parents were home and we were outside practicing, it wouldn't be a big deal. This escalated the situation rapidly and began opening more doors for him and giving him more opportunity to further his relationship. Pretty soon, the 1-hour-a-week visit turned into him driving 45 minutes to my house randomly to visit for 3 hours, 3 to 4 times a week. I was not very happy to see him anymore and began getting very worried and nervous to see him anytime he would show up. I tried to stop answering his text and he started saying things like, "You don't love me like I do," or "I'm not your favorite coach anymore, am I?" I was manipulated into thinking the way he was speaking to me for so long was normal behavior when it very much was not. I was afraid to tell my parents how he said unwarranted things to me because I knew very much they trusted him and I felt bad and guilty. Little did I know that I was being manipulated and groomed by him. The last straw for me, however, was 2 days before my 17th birthday. He came to practice and bought me a necklace with a 3-page typed up letter from him to me. I wasn't a very fast reader, but he insisted that I read it in front of him, so I barely skimmed it to amuse him and decided I would just read it later. After I had finished fake reading it, he continuously asked me if I was going to show it to my parents or if I would keep it to myself. I just brushed it off and said something like, I don't know, we'll see. When I got home, I put the letter on my bedside table drawer and completely forgot about it. A couple visits later, he began asking me questions like, do kids your age have sex? And other weird and inappropriate conversations. This was when I remembered about the letter and decided to read it. When he left, I read the letter and I was completely in shock. Basically professed his love for me and asked if we could have more time together after I graduate. He asked me to never forget about him and how he bonded with me more than any other player. He finished the letter with a picture of a heart and a key, and it stated that I had the key to his heart. Mind you, this guy is fully married. Attached to the letter was a pros and cons list of my baseball ability, which included the weird statements of, has great figure, and loves her coach very much in the pros section. I don't know, but if you ask me, that doesn't really have anything to do with baseball. I had finally bucked up and decided that it wasn't worth it and that I needed to tell my parents. They both felt incredibly bad that they hadn't seen it and that everything happened to me. A few phone calls later and he was told not to contact me and was soon after fired from his coaching job and had also had his coaching license taken away. So anyways, to the creepy old man that groomed me, let's just never meet again. If you're looking for something better than a "you looked at me and it was creepy" story, well, here you are. This is a throwaway account. This was an incredibly stressful time in my life and I'd like to stay anonymous as possible. I do admit, this story has a very fine line between bizarre and abusive, but overall, it's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. In all honesty, I've had lots of experiences that could go on r/creepy encounters. Known a lot of normal people that ended up doing bad things. Sometimes I feel like I'm cursed to make friends with rough edges. This whole situation started when I was a sophomore in high school. I showed up to school one day and noticed a new boy in my class. I was your atypical goth girl, and this guy was a teenage bad boy dream. Piercings, leather jacket, reading some sort of obscure novel. I was hooked at first sight. I introduced myself, and soon enough we were dating. He will be referred to as X for the rest of the story. Now, for a little background, I was brought up in an alcoholic parent's home. There were many times I was living by myself or with a friend because my parents were in the hospital. Despite the chaos of my family life, I still managed to go to school every day and pull decent enough grades. After one time too many, however, I left for 2+ months living alone. Instead of coming home to an empty house, I asked X if I could live with him since he was closer to school. He and his parents happily welcomed me into their home. At this point in the relationship, maybe 5 months in, we were phasing out of the puppy love stage and I was starting to notice some serious red flags. X was very mental and started cutting regularly. His parents were heavy drug users. There would be times I would try talking to X and he would literally stare off into space and not notice my existence. He was never mean or abusive towards me, but I could tell something was unhooking in him. When we started living together, it started to become very evident that something was very, very wrong. He started to tell me that he was possessed by a demon and couldn't control himself. We both spiraled into moderate drug use. I started skipping school. He started seeing these demons. In all truth, I hadn't realized what a hole I had dug myself into by living with him just yet. One night, we ended up falling asleep after smoking a bowl and watching a movie. It was a big house, and we were living in the garden-level basement, 2 or so floors below his parents and siblings. Around midnight, I had awoken by the most frightening screech I've ever heard. X was right next to me in bed, and he was contorting, convulsing, and screaming bloody murder. At first, I thought he was having a seizure. I've had friends with seizures before, and I didn't interfere, only looking for one of our cell phones to call 911. I got out of bed, and he looked at me with death in his eye. The blood drained from my veins. I've never seen such hate. Everything seemed to happen in flashes from there. He broke eye contact as he slowly rose from the bed. It almost looked like he was a marionette with a set of strings, pulled with sudden shoulders. A half smile formed on his face as his body twitched. He was walking towards me. I cannot describe how horrified I was in the corner of the room opposite the door, and I felt my ears swell and ring. He started screeching at me, coming within a centimeter of my face, never breaking his gaze. I started pushing him, yelling at him to cut it out, but it was like I was pushing a stone statue. He would not move. He finally started talking, ranting about the demon and not making a single word of sense. As bizarre as it was, I knew he was having some sort of mental episode. I truly did fear for my life, and I needed to escape. Suddenly, I felt as if I was sucked back into the moment, and my senses were incredibly acute. I noticed the window we had cracked open earlier. I pushed it back, punched through the screen, and climbed out, and he stood silently, staring at me. I'm pretty sure I stayed outside for like an hour, hyperventilating, before I decided to ring the doorbell. One of the parents answered, very confused, and set me up with a blanket on the couch in the first floor, and no questions were asked. In the morning, X came up and acted as if nothing has happened. No matter how much I would pester him about it, he would act like it was just a bad dream. I made arrangements to stay with another friend that day, and broke up with X a week after, once I was actually able to face him again. Sometimes I wonder if it had been a sick joke to get me out of his house or out of the relationship or something, but I watched it unshocked in the years after as he fell into severe drug abuse and mental illness. At one point, I went to the school counselor and told him I was worried for him, but it only made him hold a grudge against me. After everything that happened, I really started to feel sorry for him and sort of weirdly forgive him for what he did. He tried contacting me a few times after everything that happened, but as the years went by, I heard less and less. Last I heard, he was addicted to meth and living on the streets. So to my high school sweetheart, let's just not meet again.